Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar discussion topic video. In this one I want to talk about the Avatar The Last Airbender villains. People really seem to like the video I did on the Korra villains, so let's do one for the Avatar villains. So in this one I'm going to be talking about, I suppose, 5 villains here. Combustion Man, Feng, Zhao, Ozai and Azula. So they're going to be the ones that we talk about. So for the sake of this video, we're not really talking about Zuko, because of course he's only really a villain sort of like initially, and I suppose basically the purpose in a way of Zhao as a character is to show you that Zuko isn't actually meant to be viewed as being a full-on villain. We're also not going to be talking about Tylee or Mei here, because ultimately they turn, like Zuko, they turn and aren't villains for the full season and so on. So they're the characters I'm going to focus on. So let's just jump straight into it. Let's get straight into Combustion Man. Now, of course we have to start here. We know the least about him. We'll do it in this sort of order of like the characters we know sort of the least about to the most about. Or there's the most to talk about. So with Combustion Man, he's interesting, of course, primarily just because of his ability. He's this really tall guy. He has combustion bending. He blew his own arm and leg off when he was younger, learning the technique. He's this amazing assassin who developed his sort of reputation by performing extremely well in so many Agni Kais, and that's what of course led Zuko to hire him to attack the group, to try and get rid of Aang for good while he was still dealing with his sort of conflicted feelings about, you know, what he did, what he should do going forward. So he's like the secondary sort of villain of book 3 in a way. Azula is it for the most part, and then Ozai right at the end. He's mainly just a physical threat, of course. He's just meant to be this sort of relentless tracker who follows the group. That he's just kind of doing his own missions. So you can see stuff like when he intercepts the messenger hawk when scouts spot Aang. So he sort of prevents, in a way, the information getting back that Aang is alive earlier to the rest of the Fire Nation to fulfill his goal. But eventually does sort of go rogue on Zuko, I suppose, showing his general loyalty to the Fire Nation in the aftermath of all of that stuff. And we, of course, do see Combustion Man meet his end. And because of Combustion Man, of course, it's a double-edged sword. It's this incredibly powerful destructive technique that is seemingly unstoppable, but it has the weakness of you require a lot of control over it because it is so dangerous. And if you can't use that to 100% of your sort of capacity to control it, you are going to injure yourself, as shown with the injuries Combustion Man already has. The fact that they set up in prior appearances with him the idea of if you strike him in the third eye tattoo and he uses his combustion bending technique, it's going to sort of blow up in front of his face. It's not going to be targeted in the same way that it is before because of the disturbed chi paths and stuff like that, chakras. And so we see that used in the end when, that's how they basically get the advantage over him. Of they force him to use his technique, it blows up in his face, and he falls to his death at the Western Air Temple. There's a slight tease of do we know for sure he did or did not die? But they seem to be committing to the idea that he died in this moment. It was an insane fall. The fact that his metal arm was kind of left there shows that he did blow himself up. It wasn't just all about the fall. The thing went off right in his face, basically. Not quite as brutal as Pele's death, but, close enough, basically. He was cool just because, he was silent. He didn't talk. He just did things, was this relentless pursuer, and he led to some pretty decent action sequences. There's not really a lot to talk about beyond that. Again, it's the sort of typical thing of what you would want to know about the character is, a little bit more history about him and the technique. Where is he from? Does that relate in any way to why he has the ability? How did he know to put the third eye tattoo on his forehead? And how did he learn to sort of develop the technique in a way? How did he become an assassin? What are these Agni Kais that sort of happened? What were they about and over? Those are the sort of standard questions you have about him. But yeah, plays his role nicely, but he's not the most interesting villain. So from there we'll move into Long Feng, who similarly, in the grand scheme of things, we don't actually know that much about him. The idea with this character is, of course, he rose from being in the lower rings of Ba Sing Se, somehow up into basically the highest position in the Earth Kingdom. He becomes the Grand Secretariat of Ba Sing Se, as well as the leader of the Dai Li, and essentially is the leader of the Earth Kingdom because of the puppet king kind of situation going on there, the conspiracy, keeping the war hidden from everyone. Long Feng is the one making the decisions here, and he has control of things because he controls the Dai Li. And it's a nice character arc there of someone somehow, like the thing that you kind of in a way think is almost impossible when you see Ba Sing Se, of being able to claw your way up from the outer rings into the inner rings. He does it and accomplishes it to this insane degree. And that's why you think like he's going to succeed, because he did this thing. He got himself from nowhere to the top position. And then Azula comes in and just completely defeats him. And like she says, you were never even a player in this game you think we were playing. And it all comes down to the fact that, yeah, he had to, basically through hard work, get to that position. But he's not the most perfect leader. And so the Dai Li end up respecting someone who seemingly has that divine right to rule. And just, through her birthright, she is royalty. And she portrays that in all aspects of herself. She takes the loyalty of the Dai Li from Long Feng and just removes him as a player just like that. And in a way, that's the point of the character. He's meant to be so accomplished with what he managed to do. It's insane. But the fact that Azula could just come in like that and immediately turn those plans completely on their head. She gains control of the Dai Li from him, something you felt probably is impossible. But she does it and immediately he is gone. That you see, of course, Team Avatar like affect kind of the thing where like Long Feng is outed as being this kind of controlling puppet master of it all, but because he has the loyalty for a certain extent with the Dai Li, he's fine with just sitting in prison until it happens. And you see the manipulative side of his personality of like in the City of Walls and Secrets, where Team Avatar is asking a few too many questions, the Judies aren't really working. So he just has like a talk with them of just like, do you want to know where your bison is? Like, if you keep asking questions, you may never know. It's this threat. He's holding back all this information from them, and he keeps them in line by holding back things that they would want. There is the core of this extremely intelligent, clever, manipulative character, and in many ways he has some of the same traits that Azula does. He has actually some of the same traits that Ozai does in terms of his ambition. He's just not as good as he thinks he is. That there are people better than him that completely take advantage of that here. And that's, in a way, sort of the tragedy of the character, of like to see him go from such an incredible rise to like such a sudden fall. With him, you would want to know sort of the exact story behind, like, what was his actual backstory. They tell us the very, like, basic version of it, of just, he starts in the lower rings and worked his way up. So you can see that just written all over his face in the way he approaches things. He revels in being now in that sort of position of more or less kind of being royalty, being the leader. But she knows that it is not in his nature. She is just on another level than him. Like, what was his upbringing? Who were his parents? What did he do to move up so quickly? And especially sort of that transition of like, you can sort of see maybe how like, okay, he moves from the lower rings to the middle rings, and he goes into the kind of inner kind of capital of Ba Sing Se, whatever you want to call it. And he's a powerful earthbender. But how does he, does he join the Dai Li, becomes a member, then reveals himself to be very skilled, becomes the leader, and I suppose it's that transition from like leader of the Dai Li to how does he suddenly become the Grand Secretariat, and like Long Feng is not so old that like he is sort of the one who kind of created the whole thing inside the walls. That's probably the one maybe unclear thing about it, is that like the war's been going on for 100 years, of course, and no one inside the walls knows about it apart from maybe like a handful of people, basically. Like the refugees, the people on the inside don't, and they keep it away from the king, which means that it's been going on for like a very, very long time. So the impression that I get is that this conspiracy, maybe not to the same extent as Long Feng creates, has been going on for longer than him. So you have all these questions about like, okay, who was the person in that position before Long Feng? And all these other type questions that you have as well. And it answers the idea of like, what sort of a relationship, how did like Long Feng meet King Kuei? Who was the king before Kuei, and like was Long Feng kind of familiar with him? And you have all these various ideas, and I know like there's tiny little bits of information that maybe touches on this stuff, but again, it's not told to us in a particularly clear manner, and it could definitely use a little bit of backstory of like, I think people would be very interested to see more backstory surrounding the conspiracy, to see exactly how it came to be. But yeah, definitely, more interesting than Combustion Man, but definitely could use a little bit more development to see kind of where he is. In that, like, would many people have much of a problem if they like reintroduced him in some way? I'm not really sure. Like, I'd be okay with kind of like just seeing the idea for that character. Is he just in prison, or is there any use for him in some other way? But yeah, let's move on to Zhao. Now, Zhao is a very interesting character. I know some people sort of view him as just, he's just a book one villain, he's just all about power, he's just basically meant to represent the typical member of the Fire Nation military who is just power hungry. And yes, power hungry, that is a trait of basically sort of all of the Fire Nation sort of military characters. But the other thing with Zhao is definitely his ambition, and his ambition is, to me, like the key trait with him. This is what drives him in sort of like every single action that he does. It's ambition to an insane degree. It's an ambition to the point where he wants to become a legend. He wants to be remembered as basically having a title. That's why it's so significant when he says that sort of stuff of like, he will become Zhao the Moonslayer, Zhao the Invincible. He has such high views of himself that he wants to be remembered. Like, we know clearly he wants to basically be Ozai's like right-hand man, the guy that's basically second, third in charge of the Fire Nation. That's his ultimate goal. That's how ambitious he is to get there, and he will do anything to do that, which is why it's so you hate him so much. Like, he plays such a great dynamic in early book one by being the character who highlights to you that Zuko, yes, is a villain to Aang, but he is not the complete big bad of the Fire Nation, because he too is affected by the Fire Nation. That he's banished. It's just him and his crew and his uncle, and they're separate than like everything else. The rest of the Fire Nation is still doing their thing, and they don't have to assist Zuko with what he's doing. And the reason that you begin to like Zuko is, I think, initially, a large part of it is because you have such a hateable character like Zhao come in and get in Zuko's way, and you begin to see that like, oh, Zuko has this important mission. He has been banished, and the only way he can get his father's approval back, his father to restore his honor for what happened, is if he captures the Avatar. And then Zhao comes in and is just like, I'm going to steal that mission from you. I'm taking that away from you. I will get in your way at every step with regards to you trying to hunt down the Avatar, because from his point of view, if he finds the Avatar and not Zuko, Ozai will praise him. He will get that promotion to a new position, and arguably will immediately be second in command of the Fire Nation at that point. Like, we see Zhao get 2 promotions in the series. What is it? He goes from Captain Zhao to Commander Zhao to Admiral Zhao. We see that he has those ranks, so he makes his promotion to like big positions happen because we see him get that final promotion, and now he outranks Shainu and can take control of the Yuyan archers. And it's what I like about it is that it's so normal for him. He's just like, my promotion, like as if he was expecting it, just like, of course I got promoted and I'm in charge now. And he just immediately after that moves to attack the north, because every action he takes is always to do something that will go down as sort of legend in a way. I'll be the one to have captured the Avatar. I'll be the one to do what the Fire Nation has not been able to do the entire war. I will take the Northern Water Tribe. And I'll do it by killing a spirit. I will become legendary because I killed a spirit. And it's so interesting to think about that like spirits, which are so often this like mysterious kind of thing that so many characters just don't have any connection to the spirits at all. Yet Zhao, fairly unspiritual character who has like he kind of laughs in a way when he hears about like Iroh's been to the spirit world and the way Iroh is so sort of respectful towards the spirits, and he's just kind of like, okay, yeah, like there are spirits and stuff like that, but you're giving them like far too much respect. He doesn't view them in the way that you kind of should view the spirits, and it eventually becomes his downfall, which is a great part of the character. It's the great end of the character of like he eventually ends up in a way like fulfilling his destiny. He becomes known for this thing. He killed the moon spirit, and he gets punished accordingly for doing something so bad that it would make him a legend. He is killed by the ocean spirit, basically. He's dragged by the ocean spirit into the spirit world and has to remain in spirit prison for eternity, basically. That he basically becomes a spirit because his body clearly dies. He's not in there body and spirit, as far as we're aware, I think. And he's just going to live out the rest of his life in the fog of lost souls. Just knowing that, like, he's ambitious, he did this, but just to go crazy, basically, over this fact. And that's why it's kind of so significant when, like, he sees Tenzin and he thinks it's, like, Aang, but like he's so lost track of time being in there, and it's such a terrible punishment, but it's also a punishment befitting what he did. He went after a spirit with the aim of making such a big change in the world, like killing the moon spirit, destroying this thing that powers waterbending, just to gain a military kind of tactical advantage. And it speaks to that kind of cruel side of him, that he is all about power and has no view of kind of, you know, the subtle arts. And this links into the other interesting part of his personality, and I suppose his backstory of like who trained him in firebending. Zhang. I think this is very easy to forget because it's only really in one episode, but Zhang was Zhao's master. And especially because we know Zhang is part of the Order of the White Lotus, if Zhao had just kind of opened up his mind a little bit when he was being trained, we could have seen a very different character with Zhao. Like, we could have seen Zhao as part of the Order of the White Lotus if he had fully taken all of Zhang's teachings on board. But instead, as we see, he's meant to represent the Fire Nation character who completely went about things in the sort of typical Fire Nation way, which is viewing it as being all about power, all about, you know, the muscles, and not about the true philosophy behind firebending of it being life, that, you know, control is something that should be essential to your firebending, not just making the biggest flame possible. And so you immediately get that dynamic of all Zhao took from his training with Zhang was learning the power techniques, and he didn't learn any of the discipline. The thing that Zhang was trying in that episode to teach Aang so heavily, that was the thing that Zhao lost. And of course that's meant to be sort of Zhang's kind of character arc. That's why he is so kind of strict on the idea of he will only train people with discipline, so another Zhao isn't created. And we see that, like, Zhao is considered a firebending master. Like, Iroh views him in that way, and obviously Iroh would be familiar with Zhao. And that's very interesting because I think it's very easy to view Zhao as just being like, he kind of seems kind of very middle of the road in a way, but he is a master firebender. It just speaks to the idea of Zuko really got the advantage, like suddenly shifted the tide in their Agni Kai. But at the end of book 2, they end up having a relatively even battle back and forth as Zuko is beginning to sort of come into his own as a very powerful firebender. So he is very, very skilled. It just is one of those things he maybe doesn't stand out as much because so many of the characters we typically focus on are prodigal benders. He's probably not at that level, but if he had taken all of Zhang Zhang's teachings to heart, who knows what type of character we could have had. Like, imagine Zhao if he was able to do the firebending sort of defensive walls and was this very control-based firebender. It obviously would be the complete opposite of the style he is now, but it would be a different type of character, because say what you will about him and how he's sort of a simplistic character in some ways, but he like accomplished a lot. The fact that he did his research and went to Wan Shi Tong's library, got in there, did the research well enough to actually locate and figure out what the mortal form of the Ocean and Moon Spirit were, and then actually went to the north and accomplished what he set out to do. That is incredible that he was able to do that. Now, you would ask the question, of course, of how did he get, even in any way, come across the idea of like needing to do that? And like, it's obviously meant to be this idea of what he views in a way as being his destiny, accomplishing something that would make him go down as legend. And he felt that he, I suppose, pretty much always had that target in mind, that when he had the rank in the Fire Nation military to where he could actually lead a effective assault against the North, he would do it, and he has the goals and the way to actually accomplish that. And he does it. And I'd love it if they added something like, somewhere in his training with Zhang Zhang maybe mentions something about the spirits. Wan Shi Tong's library is this place that has all this information. That because Zhang is Order of the White Lotus, he would of course, I suppose, know about some of that more spiritual stuff to a degree. Again, the Order of the White Lotus is very mysterious, so it's hard to know what exactly they do and don't know. But you would have to assume Zhao got the hint, the tease of where he could get this information from somewhere. As he tells the story, I think it's just kind of like, he basically just says, I went to this mysterious library and found this information. And of course, the other thing that he does there that is very clever for the Fire Nation, he destroys all the records on basically anything Fire Nation related, and prevents the gang, as we see it, from easily getting access to information that could help them against the Fire Nation. And if not for there being that sort of the whole sundial thing there to track when the next eclipse is going to be, Zhao nearly prevented the invasion from happening there just with that sort of preemptive measure. So he is this intelligent character as much as we maybe don't often view him in that way. So, I definitely have a lot of praise for Zhao. I think the last few times I've rewatched the show, I've definitely been able to see him in a much better light in terms of like, there is actually a lot of depth there. There's a whole story there with the spirit connection, the Zhang connection, and then just the idea of him, more than almost anyone, really representing that ambitious drive of a character. In the same way that we see it with Long Feng, we see this from a more military perspective of like the fact that he's willing to go in and just take Zuko's only path of redemption from him just to increase his position in the Fire Nation. It's so petty, but it fits his character so well. And that's why you love that rivalry between Zuko and Zhao over the course of the series. Of Zhao is this initial test for Zuko of like, if you go too far down this path, you're going to end up sort of becoming like this guy. Do you want to do that? And in the end, I think Zuko realizes that he doesn't, and that's why his development in book 2 is sort of so important to really move him away from kind of in any way feeling like he's connected to the Fire Nation, but then being drawn back in. So I think that's most of what I want to talk about with Zhao as a character. He definitely has like stood out to me a lot more as being like very, very interesting as we go on. Again, I'd love to see some sort of material in the future, cover maybe some backstory of like Zhang training him, a little bit more of the sort of connective tissue between some of those earlier moments in his life of like, you know, how he came to become the apprentice, student of Zhang, and then how he came to find the library and so on. That's probably the big interesting story with him. So yeah, and then I do love the fact that they did remember him in Korra, and that if they're in the spirit world, here is a prisoner, of course, who would be there, and it fits so well, I think. Well, I suppose one final thing would just be, again, talking about that scene of, like, as he's dragged off by the ocean spirit, the fact that he pulls his hand back, that Zuko offers his hand to try and save Zhao, because as much as he's angry at him, he doesn't want him to get dragged away by a spirit. Like, what sort of an ending is that? And again, it's a very complex scene, and there's a bunch of different ways to view it, of like, is it just the simple interpretation of Zhao will not take help from Zuko, not take help from his rival, someone he doesn't respect? Or is there also a sense of like, look at the situation he's in. He's killed the moon spirit. He's now on the run from, like, Iroh just started firebending and is going crazy, taking out his guards and so on. Iroh's angry at him. The spirits are angry at him. And here's one giant one who is furious at him, holding him in his hand. I think there's also a sense of like, I did this, I brought this on myself. I'm not going to take your help, Zuko. I'm accepting this. That, like, this is the legacy that I've caused in a way of, his lack of respect towards the spirits coming back for him in the end as he is dragged into the spirit world where he lives the rest of his life. There's something oddly fitting about that. If people will remember what he did in the north, but he's kind of just forgotten in a way, just as a person, because he's just gone from the world and is just forever in the fog of lost souls and is literally lost. So from there, let's move into Ozai. I do maintain that, like, Azula for sure is a much more complex character than Ozai is. And arguably, in some ways, there's arguably more to talk about with Zhao than there is with Ozai. But he's the main villain of ATLA, so like we have to view him as being pretty important. So yeah, I think a lot of people can sort of maybe criticize the show because Ozai really isn't that complex. The depth that is there for him is in terms of what he does to Zuko, and the teases through little bits of backstory, like in Zuko Alone and stuff like that, of just how he sort of navigated like the royal family politics to become Fire Lord. Because again, he's the younger brother. Iroh should be the one who's next in line, but Ozai is the one who ends up as being Fire Lord. How does that happen? And of course, it links into the very complex story of like Ursa and Ozai and what they did to Azula, and the Search comic is what obviously tells the story of what happened. But it's also, I think, the comics is actually where we get most of, I think, the characterization of who Ozai actually is as a character. And you also have to, I think, very heavily link in the idea of, like, Azula is the way she is because of Ozai. So a lot of Azula's traits are also traits that Ozai himself has. We just don't see them as much because Azula gets to be a main character in 2 seasons of the show, whereas Ozai only really gets to be a character in, like, 5-6 episodes, basically. But the idea is that manipulation is also something he is exceptionally skilled at. The way he talks to Zuko during their confrontation, as the eclipse, happens, of course, and how Zuko is all ready to go, but he brings him back in by mentioning his mother, mentioning Ursa and what happened. And he knows that, like, it's just a matter of time until the eclipse ends, and he waits until he can get that opportunity to strike. And I think one of the other points with Ozai, and it's crazy every time I say this because it's shocking to believe that it's true. The fact that we've never seen Ozai and Iroh interact, yet that is clearly one of the dynamics that I think drives the character. His sort of, I think, jealousy of the fact that he is not the crown prince, that he is not the one who's sort of next in line, that most people, I think, agree with the idea that they would view Iroh as actually being the more powerful bender of the two. Now, it's difficult to say that exactly because we never really see Ozai bend without the comet, and the one time we do, it is lightning. And it's sort of difficult to view specific scenes of characters doing lightning and like overly compare them in terms of a power level. But still, you get the idea. They're both very powerful, but we view Iroh as being potentially one of the best benders in the entire series. And Ozai is meant to be there, but it's difficult to say Ozai's better. So there's clearly that jealousy, that rivalry. And if you read the Legacy of the Fire Nation book that came out relatively recently, that book touches on that idea. Obviously, there's no real depth to it, and it's more of a just inference of, like, this likely is the case of, like, yeah, they were competitive growing up, and because of that, it sort of created a rift between the two. Because the Fire Nation is purely on the basis of who was first born, there was that sense of almost Ozai is behind Iroh. Iroh is more talented, and he has the birthright. What is Ozai to do? So it's an interesting like dynamic to just talk about, and the idea, of course, being that Iroh is also sort of the better person, the better character in a way. He's not particularly like his father or grandfathers, Azula and Sozin, whereas Ozai actually is developing in that way. And there's one line in Legacy of the Fire Nation that's very good in terms of informing the theme within the family, and that being that a lot of the times the leaders of the royal family sort of stoke that rivalry to create the sort of cruel characters that are required to become Fire Lord. And so, really stoking that relationship, that competitiveness between the brothers, creates the rift between them, but turns Ozai into the character that we see he is. Turns Ozai into your Sozin 3.0, your Azula 2.0, whatever way you want to refer to it. The next evil Fire Lord, basically. Now, there's not much of a sense of it meant to in any way being like a sympathetic backstory or anything like that. But I think you can just tell from Ozai's actions and the idea of he takes power and then basically proceeds to focus on his second-born, not his firstborn. Now, there are reasons for that with Zuko about why he specifically doesn't treat him well, that link into the Search comic, of course, of just Ursa tried to sort of, in a way, just insult me, try and get one over on me. So if she's going to do that, she will receive punishment for that. And what I'm going to do is basically treat him the way that lie wanted him to be treated, as if he's not my son. You'll get your wish. I will not treat him like that, and I will treat him as if he was just the son of some peasant, basically. And that's the explanation for why Zuko is treated the way he is by Ozai. It's just this spiteful action from Ozai, purely to just get one over on his wife during one moment of Ursa's defiance towards Ozai. And it speaks to just how completely cruel he is, how he doesn't have that love, that connection for anyone. And that's why I think that moment at the end of Smoke and Shadow, where Ursa finally confronts Ozai, is very insightful, not just for it's a great moment for Ursa to finally get that out in front of Ozai, but it tells us exactly the flaw of Ozai as a character, is that he doesn't have room in his heart for anyone. He's completely locked off that side of his personality. He doesn't truly care for anyone, regardless of who it is. His son, his daughter, his brother, anyone. There's just a complete lack of care there. And that has clearly been passed on to Azula, as I'll discuss when I get to Azula. But you see that is who he is. He is just, in a way, following that destiny of the royal family that is only changed through Zuko, of just to follow from Sozin, continue the war, and in Ozai's case, he will be the one to end the war. And you see the cruelty come out just with everything he's about. What the sequence that led to Zuko being banished, of like Ozai being basically fine with, sure, sacrifice a whole troop of brand new recruits just to get a slight tactical advantage. We're cool with that. And then him interpreting what Zuko says in the meeting that Zuko tells the group about, of like, he talks about what he's learned by being around the people of the Earth Kingdom, that they're strong and will never give up. And he's like, ah, yes, so because they're strong and together, the only way to really accomplish defeating them is to like burn their land to the ground so that there is nothing to sustain, basically. And so his view on Zuko just sort of, in a way, like guiding them in the way of like, it's going to be tough. Like, you have to be aware that they won't give up. Our troops are going to need to be just as tenacious as they are to win. And Ozai interprets that as like, we'll destroy their hope. We'll take that away from them. We'll do the cruelest thing possible so that we'll break them, and then we'll get the advantage. It's you know, that's the way he views things. It's so different than the way Iroh thinks, so different than the way Zuko thinks. And you see all the other generals, like Azula as well, they're all like, yes, that's the way we'll do it. We'll burn it to the ground. And you get the sense that that's the way that they do this, to get what they want, to get control of the world, to spread the prosperity of the Fire Nation, apparently, to everywhere. This is just what they're going to do. And so there is that sort of, sad aspect in the sense that ultimately Ozai is this very empty character. He doesn't have much to him when the power is taken away. He is now a non-bender in prison for, as far as we're aware, the rest of his life. And he has no good relationship with anyone anymore. Like, you have, of course, the promise where Zuko talks to him, but now Ursa has gotten like what she needs to say out to him. Azula really wants nothing to do with Ozai anymore as well, because she views him as being weak by being a non-bender and having no power anymore. In a way, the only thing you'd say for Ozai is that there's maybe some slight hope that Iroh might actually want to talk to Ozai about what happened, to just try and address where their relationship went so wrong earlier on in their lives, and why over the course of this entire series they never interacted once. And that's what's so interesting. And I'll discuss like Iroh's dynamic with both like Azula and Ozai, and the idea that the one character that they're both sort of blind to, almost, in terms of how important he is Iroh. Especially for Azula, it's incredible to see how skilled she is at seeing sort of through everyone, seeing the path to manipulation with everyone, knowing who the main threats are, regardless of the situation. Yet she never sees that with Iroh, because she just has such a lack of respect for him, despite how powerful everyone else can actually view him as. It's very interesting. But yeah, do you have any final points on Ozai? Like, I maintain that, like, I think the comics have really turned him into like a much more interesting character than just the evil Fire Lord who wants power. He's just doing, his family's bidding, basically. Showing you that he has that manipulative side to him as well. That cruelty has been there in like every aspect of his life. Like the way he treats Ursa when they get married, and like she's kind of like, oh, okay, I guess it'll be fine, my parents are still going to be here. And then he's like, no, you're mine. I own you now. This is the last time you will ever see your parents here, is at the wedding ceremony. So say goodbye to them. It's done. And just the cruelty he shows Ursa over the course of their relationship, if you can even call it that, of just any slight sense of freedom from Ursa, and he shuts her down. Whether it be sending an assassin out to kill, like Ikem, of course, her former kind of love interest, and who she's now married to again, which is great to see, and telling her about that, and like just gloating in front of her face of like, this is what I did, how do you feel? And then what he says to her about, this is why I'll treat Zuko. You're the one responsible for why I'm going to treat Zuko so terribly going forward. And, the fact that her banishment, he is the one who basically is like, okay, yeah, stay away. And if you stay away, I won't actively seek to hurt the kids, but you'll never get to see them again. All because, of course, Ursa is the one who supplies the poison that allows Ozai to kill his father, which is a big point that I can't believe I forgot to talk about up to now. Just like that, Ozai kills his father with that poison that is given to him by Ursa. He just does it to get the power that he wants. And it speaks to that, I think, very important scene of Ozai showing his own ambition of immediately after they find out Liu Ten has been killed and that, Iroh's bloodline, I suppose, is gone, and that Iroh is not returning anytime soon to the Fire Nation, he goes straight to his father and is like, give me the birthright, make me next in line to the throne. And Azula, like, of course, I think to a degree, like, rightfully is like, why would you say that? You deserve to be punished for thinking that way about things. So you will, and he takes it too far, the typical Fire Lord thing of like, you will receive the same punishment and know the same pain that Iroh experienced, the pain of losing your firstborn. And because of the way Ozai views Zuko, it's not a threat at all. He doesn't view that in any way as being like, he's just going to go ahead with it. And that's what sparks Ursa to act to save Zuko here in that sequence. Like, you get that Ozai isn't just sort of like locked into his family's destiny, but like truly is this really, really cruel person who is honestly terrible. So there's no hope, I think, for redemption for him, but there's maybe the opportunity to have an interesting discussion with Iroh at some point, I think. So yeah, that leaves just Azula then to talk about. And Azula is just such a complicated character that, like, I could do a whole video on her. I have done whole videos on her in the past. So instead we'll just keep it to a relatively short section here at the end of the video, because I have talked about Azula as a character so much. And again, what's interesting about her is, like, in terms of her motivation for like most of the entire series, it is just to assist Ozai in terms of what he wants. Azula, her entire actions, what informs them throughout the entire show, is sort of being Ozai's, lieutenant, basically, out in the field, because she knows exactly what he would want done. He trusts her for the most part with that. She forms her team and is just there, actively out there, accomplishing what she needs to do. Now, there's definitely a sense of, like, she kind of seems to do everything she can to sort of get one over on Zuko at certain points, and she takes such glee in terms of manipulating Zuko, because I think there's a slight sense, you get it there, that he passed on to her that sort of sibling rivalry and sort of stoked that as well, of that Zuko is the firstborn, but you get the impression that the second he saw that Zuko wasn't turning out so well as a firebender initially, he pretty much had agreed on the idea that, like, she's going to be the next Fire Lord. The birthright is hers because she is everything I want, and Zuko's become a disappointment. But because of the way the family ends up going, this is what really, I think, informs a lot about who and what Azula is as a character, is that she becomes, like, raised almost exclusively by Ozai, and Ursa is forced into a situation where for Zuko to get anything within the family, she has to focus on him, which means putting attention away from Azula. And this rift within the family is, in a way, what forms that dynamic. It's why Zuko, you have such hope for the character, is because you can see that within him is that good character that Ursa has helped to sort of develop within Zuko. Whereas she didn't get as much attention from her mother, so Azula is sort of almost questionable about if she even has that. Because you see that even from a very young age, she always has that kind of cruel edge to her. She's always trying to manipulate the situation and, cause these little bits of issues and drama and control things. That's, to a degree, a core aspect of her character that isn't just completely got from Ozai. But it doesn't help that Ozai was the main person raising her. And you can see that, I think, that the beach is, I think, the main episode to highlight here of what Azula is missing as a character is that clearly Ozai only thought her skills that would help her in terms of being a tool to accomplish his own goals. He never raised her in a way to just be a normal girl, a normal person. Which is why you see that she pretty much only knows how to manipulate and control people and keep people on her side in that way. She views everything as being almost like a military tactical example, something that she has to succeed in by getting everyone on her side, and that's how she keeps control. She doesn't know how to have proper friends. Now, of course, she was actually friends with Mei Tai Li, and I suppose had a better relationship with Zuko when they were younger. But you can tell that once that mentality of controlling people through fear and manipulating people set in, it became her defining trait, the thing that fully defines her as a character, and that, of course, as we see, the second people are able to break through that, break through her main thing, control through fear, she begins to break. That she doesn't know what to do when she can't control people in that way. She just can't handle it. Like when Mei betrays her and literally says that I love Zuko more than I fear you, she doesn't know what to make of that almost. That's how big that moment is. That nothing should be able to be bigger than their fear of her. But it is, and it's so interesting that it is for Mei. Love, that's the thing that does it, because it's the one thing that in a way Azula sort of understands the least in a way. And a lot of that is in a way because, and you can link it to Ursa, of like she perhaps didn't get enough love from Ursa because of that family dynamic, and that's why that is such a significant thing to her. But it's also because, it, like I said earlier on, Ozai is empty. He doesn't have love for anyone either. No care for his family. And it's a very similar case with Azula. She treats her own family in the exact same way, as just sort of tools to be used, and has no care for them whatsoever. And that's what she's going to have to learn, because I think they are doing some sort of a redemption character growth arc. I know the word redemption, when used in relation to Azula, sparks a little bit of a discussion either way, but the idea is that I think most people expect Azula to go through some sort of major character growth where she's going to come out of it on the other side with a different perspective. Whether or not they'll go full redemption in the same way that they did with Zuko, I don't know. But either way, I think they want to get Azula to the point where control through fear isn't the only thing. There's a reason we haven't seen the Ursa-Azula conversation yet. It's been set up basically since the beach, in a way since the Zuko alone backstory, of like there was a need for these two characters to discuss what has happened. Because it's so significant that when Azula is losing her mind in the finale, basically, she hallucinates her mother. And she hallucinates her mother like saying that, she loves her, saying all these supportive things to her. But, and it's true, like that's the sort of stuff Ursa ultimately does say to her. But Azula's view of most of how Ursa views her is that she thinks I'm a monster. And she agrees with it. In the beach she says, it's true of course, but it still hurt. And it's just that idea of like her behavior, like Ursa was correct to sort of question it. And that, like we see her say sort of like, what is wrong with that girl? Because Azula's behavior wasn't very good. Like look at a lot of those scenes of just being happy in a way that Lu Ten is dead because that opens the path to Ozai to the throne. She basically says stuff like that. She starts laughing and taking such glee in holding this over Zuko, that she heard that Ozai is going to kill Zuko. And of course that's a shocking thing for a mother to hear, their daughter being like, ha ha ha, I heard that dad wants to kill you. It's like, whoa. Like there was a problem with Azula from an early age, and it's not because Ursa is this bad mother or anything like that, but it's Ozai's influence, but also a sense that that is just the character that she is, and that's why I think the debate comes in about, you have to be careful about how you do the sort of Azula redemption arc, in terms of you can't go too far with it because she has done so much that is wrong. And I don't think people want to see the character have all of the edge removed from the character. You still, coming out of this, want Azula to be able to manipulate people. You still want her to be on the colder side of things, but you have to have her be opened up more to characters, be able to actually care about them. And so you have to find that right balance of using her skills, I suppose, more in the right way, and not just using her skills for everything. And so it is about, like, I suppose, restoring her true friendship with Mei and Ty Lee, actually beginning to view Zuko as a brother, find the connection again with her mother, and, you know, maybe even find a way to sort of see and finally respect Iroh for who he is and what he can offer her. That's what you want to see. Ozai has closed off his heart from love. The idea with Azula, I think, is that it isn't fully closed. That there is a way to open that door, even just a little bit, so that Azula can care for other characters. And I think that's the way to approach the arc, is to, like, as of Smoke and Shadow, she realizes that it is not her destiny to become the Fire Lord. She knows that that's not her goal. That is not her destiny. She accepts that Zuko is the one who is, like, meant to be the Fire Lord. She accepts that. But what she still doesn't accept is the way that he needs to be Fire Lord. She thinks that the Fire Lord still needs to be effectively the type of Fire Lord she would have been. And so she's trying to force a situation for Zuko to, like, morph into that character, who she views as, like, Zuko can't make the big decisions. That even when he's strong, he's still weak. She still has that sense of, like, viewing people who care as being weak, when we see that a lot of the moments of, I suppose, Azula being weak, being sort of broken, are her showing her emotions, and she views that as being a weakness rather than, at times, it can be a strength. And that's why it was so significant of Mei's betrayal, Ty Lee's betrayal, and what informed it, and so on. In a way, like, it'd be so interesting to know more about, like, Azula's feelings on Ursa's backstory, of, like, how strong Ursa was in the past in terms of putting herself on the line to protect others, and so on, even at the expense of herself. So the big thing that we need to see next from Azula is what finally gets the breakthrough for the character, to finally realizing that control through fear isn't the only way to do things. That's the essential thing within all of this. Because to me, that's what Smoke and Shadow highlights, is that she makes one step of growth, that being, yeah, I'm not meant to be Fire Lord, it's meant to be you. I am going to be your advisor, basically. Fulfill this role. I'm fine with not being in the spotlight as the Fire Lord, but I'll make you into the person you need to be. And she tries to, you know, create this situation where it's just like, look at who I turned you into in just the last day with the decisions that I forced you to make. But Zuko at the end just realizes that, like, no, and gives a speech that is more hopeful. And Azula's reaction at the end is kind of like, how touching. Like, almost like, I still have work to do to force him into the way things need to be. So she's still thinking about things inherently from the wrong position, and viewing Zuko sort of caring about the people, caring about his how he comes across to his people as being a problem. And Azula can't see that that's what the Fire Nation actually needs. They do also need some of the sort of more kind of to the point strength that maybe Zuko is a little bit more like, you know, I respect what the Avatar says. He's maybe not being strong in certain situations. And that's where it feels like the path that they're heading down is that Azula being Zuko's advisor is actually the path that they want to go down. That she would add, as an advisor, the sort of edge to Zuko that he wouldn't have just on his own. They would have someone who can be strong for the Fire Nation and help Zuko to see when maybe harsher decisions are needed. But you still have Zuko as the person who cares and is the good Fire Lord, being the one who makes the end decision. But you have to do something, I think, big to get to that point. And it probably is literally just finally, in a non-violent way, just getting Ursa and Azula to talk. And as Ursa to apologize for everything that happened, but just note that, like, I've always loved you, like, hated being away from you and Zuko, or like Zuko and you specifically. I hated what happened. Like, I wish I could have been, a better mother to both of you, but especially you, Azula. Like, something along those lines of just a powerful statement from Ursa that just cannot be denied by Azula, and it just hits her, and you actually get a properly emotional scene from Azula, and you have her sort of accept finally, like, her mother's love, and that's what opens the door. I think it has to be something like that. Again, there's a lot of moving parts in that side of the story, in that with Azula you have her connection to Mei and Ty Lee, you have Zuko, you have Iroh, you have Ursa, you have Ki, who might actually play some sort of an interesting role of, like, Azula has a sister, how does she view that? They've been leaning you sort of in the direction of, like, oh, she's replaced me with a new daughter who's actually, like, she cares about or whatever. But it'd be interesting to see Ki, who is, like, calling Zuko Zuzu and stuff like that, if she just treats Azula as being her actual sister, and if that could potentially open the door. Those type of things. Maybe Iroh trying to give Azula some advice could be something that's very helpful for her. But that's what's so interesting about the character of, like, everyone loves a lot of those early Azula scenes of just showing her being so commanding of, do the tides control this ship? You're going to have to deal with me. Just being this force of nature when it comes to dealing with people and gaining their loyalty and control over them. Like I already explained with Long Feng, that was arguably, like, her biggest moment. This guy who was all about control, look at what he accomplished, and she just steps in and takes it over. And she takes Ba Sing Se for the Fire Nation without lifting much of a finger, basically. She doesn't need a giant invasion army, she just sneaks in, takes over, takes control, and effortlessly strikes and takes everything down. There's complicated parts of that story along the way, but fundamentally, she did it in such an insanely clever way. Like, she is truly brilliant. She is the prodigy of the two. Blue firebending, amazing lightning bender, and even where she is in the comics now, she's still learning. She's still developing those techniques. Now, she can lightning redirect as well. She is so skilled, so talented, that, if she could be, useful, if she could get into a situation where she could be on the good guy side of things, she could be so valuable in so many ways. And that's why everyone talks about, like, Azula is such an important arc to do in the comics, and they just have to do it because it's all there, set up and waiting to go. That links in very nicely to everything that's already happened with the character, and it's all there. Like I said, all those dynamics that you have for her, you can go so many ways to cover all of that. But yeah, like, the arc of Azula within the show of, like, the control through fear broken by, in a way, Zuko, Mei, Ty Lee, and, being defeated by Katara. That's also sort of a symbolic thing for the character as well, of she defeats Long Feng by, like, her divine right to rule. She gets one over on the sort of peasant who rose his way up to the top. Yet she's defeated, as Azula would basically call her, by a water tribe peasant, someone who doesn't come from royalty or anything like that. She's defeated by someone so normal. While she should be at her most powerful, as Sozin Comet empowered, she's defeated by a waterbender. And that is a very impressive feat for Katara, but it shows how far Azula fell at that moment. And her spiral at the end worked, because the other thing that happened was she was so all behind Ozai, but the second he said, you stay here, you'll be Fire Lord, you don't get to come with me on the big mission that will basically end the war. There's this weird sense of like her trust in the whole situation is broken, that she's already had her relationship with Mei and Ty Lee sort of shattered. Zuko's turned sides and stuff like that. And now Ozai, in her mind, just saying this relatively normal thing to her of like, I want you to hold the fort here. You're the Fire Lord now. Like giving her a promotion. But she views it as like, why are you treating me like Zuko? Like, why aren't you trusting me in the same way? And he doesn't handle it well. He doesn't see that she's unraveled right in front of him, because his heart isn't open to see that she's off. She's way off. And I think that's the biggest insight into probably Azula and Ozai's characters, of just that moment spells so much wrong for like almost the two of them. Him leaving her behind in that state kind of loses him the war. So like it's a pretty interesting scene. So yeah, they're my thoughts on the Avatar: The Last Airbender villains. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this video. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.